So we will now hand over to one of the stars of the event, Tom Palmer. Tom is the Executive Vice President of the Atlas Network and a scholar in residence at the Center for Independent Studies who has brought him over, so we really appreciate that from the CIS, thank you. Tom is, I think, perhaps one of, if not the most persuasive speakers for liberty in the world. So with that sort of introduction, I don't think he can say much else. Now, he doesn't have much to live up to, but please make him welcome, Tom Palmer.
Thank you very much, John, for that basically setting me up to fail in that introduction. But it's really a great pleasure to be in Australia, and for one thing, it's been a social science experiment for me. Every place around the world I meet Australians, and they're always nice people. One hypothesis is there's some kind of immigration or emigration control, and they don't let the nasty people leave. It turns out, now that I'm in Australia, I haven't met any. So it's a great place to be. I really, really like Australia and the liberty culture. And I should mention in particular, having recently been in Cambodia, the work that John and Rachel and his colleagues have been doing there, in books coming out now in Khmer, and the spread of libertarianism in Cambodia. And I'm really, really grateful to the Aussie libertarians for making that possible. What I want to talk about today is a thesis that is quite important to our movement. We are often criticized by our friends on the left and the right as somehow not serious, not mature. It's all about freedom and do your own thing. And come on, we should grow up and we understand we have responsibilities. But in fact, the liberty movement is the responsibility movement. And that's what I want to talk about today. State control or self-control. This is a movement about people taking responsibility for their lives. Demanding freedom and responsibility is a theme of a book I'm working on right now, State Control or Self-Control. It should be available, I hope, this fall. And it'll join some of the other books that in the series that I produced that are basically snack packs about liberty. So they're short essays, you can read one, you don't have to read them all, and there should be something for everyone. And I've tried to get stimulating authors who can help to explicate the ideas of liberty. So various books that have come out so far. All of them are available in PDF. You can download as well. This one was reprinted by CIS in an Australian edition, My Liberty, and then the most recent one, Peace, Love, and Liberty. Now this new book will feature original essays by some very serious economists from the IDA, Phil Booth, Steve Davies, historian, Jeffrey Myron from Harvard, talking about the ways in which the state has pushed aside the institutions that help people to take control over their own lives and to be responsible people. And that's a very important element. The state has colonized society and has destroyed those organic institutions that people used to rely on to help them to be better people and to make better choices. Jafetha Mujua from Nigeria talking about a very important point. Politicians tell us to be responsible, but they are almost never held accountable for their behavior. And he's going to write about why we should hold politicians accountable and have accountable government. I'll be writing some essays on individualism. Sarah Squire, one of my colleagues, she's writing on responsibility in literature, and that's a very exciting element. We need more poets and more art in our movement. John Tierney from the New York Times is a great chapter. I'll talk a bit more about him in a moment. Nir Bladwar is a moral philosopher, Igor McConnell also in philosophy. Nima Sanandaji from Sweden on social science. I'll talk a bit more about his work. And then Lynn Kiesling, she's an economist at Northwestern. Now when you mention responsibility, be responsible, what is it most people think? What comes to their mind, right? Scolds, right? It's somehow a bad thing, and in addition, it's boring. Talk about responsibility is boring. And indeed, our friends on the left very much exemplify this attitude. The Rousseauian approach to liberty is unrestrained, do whatever you want, whatever comes into your mind, without regard for the consequences for yourself or for others. But we as libertarians believe very much in the importance of consequences, and in particular the consequences of our behavior on other people. Because to be a libertarian is to believe that other people matter, that the rights of other people are important. That is the key to being a libertarian. It's a simple example. Unlike the last 3 American presidents, I don't take drugs. I did try marijuana when I was very young. I didn't like it. It wasn't my thing. I did inhale a couple of times, and I didn't like it. So that's not part of my life. But it upsets me terribly when other people are imprisoned, brutalized, and put in a cage for owning a plant. It's just wrong. It doesn't affect me personally. I don't do it. It's not in my house. But it angers and upsets me that other people are victimized in this way. I'm not a member of a persecuted religious minority, but it angers and upsets me when other people are persecuted for the way that they worship God or choose not to worship. It's wrong, even if it doesn't affect me personally. Many of you are here because it's some great selfish thing for you to be here on Saturday morning. You're here because you care about liberty. Liberty for yourself and liberty for other people. That's what it means to be a libertarian. Well, those who view responsibility and freedom as boring are very, very wrong. The fact is that the denial of freedom means a denial of our responsibilities. And I'll talk about what that means in social order. It has very serious consequences. When people's freedom is denied, it means they cannot develop the habits of self-control to be able to lead better lives. And in addition, the history of liberty is the history of personal responsibility. I'll talk very briefly about that. When we deny freedom to people, we deny them the opportunity for personal growth. We deny them the opportunity to become better people through the choices that they make. When we take responsibility for our lives, it is an act of personal liberation. And the current generation, I mentioned Students for Liberty. I'm very happy to see Australia and New Zealand Students for Liberty. That is the generation that is the grown-up generation. It has a lot to teach their elders in our societies. Now, if you think about the origin of this whole tradition, the right to liberty was founded on the recognition of personal responsibility. Not unrestrained, do whatever you want. It was the recognition that every person is responsible. One of the very important decretals of Pope Innocent IV, the great lawyer Pope, was about the question of the rights of non-Christians, of infidels, of Jews and Muslims. And he said, you may not hurt them, you may not take their lives or their property or destroy them. Why? Because they have dominium. This is one of the most important words in the history of liberty, dominium. It comes from the Latin domus, a house. Dominus was master of the house. And under old Roman law, the master of the house was responsible for the household. We have a little element of this today. If a small child breaks your window, you don't take the child to court for damages. You go to the child's parents. But at that time, the dominus was responsible for the whole family, including all of the adults. We don't believe that anymore. But the notion of dominium meant self-mastery. It came to mean mastery of yourself, to be accountable for yourself. And as Innocent IV said, dominium and possession and jurisdiction can belong to infidels, non-Christians. He was obviously a Christian, but it can belong to non-Christians licitly and without sin. These things are made not only for the faithful, but for every rational creature. But that's the foundation of the tradition of rights, to recognize people as bearers of moral responsibility. And at the very least, you have the right to fulfill your moral responsibilities. It would be an injustice to stop you from doing that. And on that foundation, the idea of rights emerged. Now, the history of liberty is the history of personal responsibility. We're moral agents because we can be held accountable for our actions. We can choose the courses of action in front of us. If no choice is available to you, if someone forces your hand, you're not held accountable. But if you made the choice, you are accountable for the outcome. And we are not just inert things to be ordered around by our masters. We are not implements or tools of the state. We do not belong to the state. I resented tremendously every time politicians talk about my people, our people, and they act as if the nation is their property to dispose of. But we are not. We are very much masters of ourselves. Another great figure, Francisco de Vitoria, who defended the rights of the Indians, a Spaniard, who stood up and said, this is unjust what was done to the Indians. And what was his argument? A person is master of his own actions, insofar as he is able to make choices between one course and another. And the Indians had personal mastery. It was unjust and vicious to take their land, to rape them, to murder them, as was done. And he and his colleagues defended the rights of the Indians, a great move in human rights. That tradition was built on by the first, let's say the first real libertarians, the levelers in England. Richard Overton's famous claim, written in prison in 1646, to every individual is given, in nature, is given individual property by nature not to be invaded by or usurped by any. For everyone, as he is himself, so he has a self-propriety, else could he not be himself. Your very identity as a human being is tied up in your responsibility and your freedom. Now these were real radicals, and despite the mildly gendered language of English, they were also feminists. There were female levelers, which enraged their opponents, as you could imagine. How dare women express opinions on such matters, unless she's the queen, in which case we must give her absolute obedience. But women shouldn't speak up, and they were so radical. They were defenders of absolute religious liberty, freedom of trade, limited government, rights for all religions. They defended the rights of the Catholics, although all of them were Protestants. They were so radical they took a position even today some people consider a little edgy. I'll mention it to you so we can debate it later. They believed even Irish people have rights. And refused to wage war on the Irish when it was demanded by Cromwell. They said, we will not wage cruel war and persecution over matters of conscience. If you want, you can go to a great shrine of liberty in England, in Burford, a small village, and you can see where levelers were lined up against the wall and shot. The holes in the wall are still there. And on the baptismal font scratched in Anthony Sedley, prisoner, 1649, because they refused to persecute the Irish over their religion. These were great libertarians. As I mentioned, liberty isn't just about you or me, liberty for everyone. One of our great forebears, Joaquim Nabuco, a classical liberal from Brazil who dedicated his life to eliminating slavery, said we should educate our children and ourselves in the love for the freedom of others. That is the key to being a libertarian, to love freedom for everybody, not just for yourself. Now, when we deny freedom, we stunt the growth of personal responsibility and good habits. The wonderful essay I recommend you find online, it's delightful, by Albert J. Knott. A very subtle essay. He was educating Americans about prohibition by contrasting the United States with Great Britain, which had much more personal freedom at that time. And he pointed out that the English have this delightful phrase, doing the right thing. Even though you may not be compelled, you should do the right thing. It's a wonderful meditation on the personal responsibility to do the right thing, even if it isn't compulsory. When we deny people's freedom and responsibility, what do we get? Widespread poisoning, because brand names are not allowed in the case of narcotics. What's also true earlier in alcohol. So responsible habits are discouraged. You can't take your dealer to court when you get bad stuff. It's illegal. You incriminate yourself when you do so. We get a decline in savings and planning for the future because the state's going to take care of us. This has been demonstrated in country after country. Inattention to the long-term sustainability of pension plans. Now, Australia is not in the worst condition in the world. You're about 20 years behind Greece. But you're still headed for problems with accumulated unfunded liabilities. And we have also, in some countries, the United States is one of the worst, an attack on personal pleasure. Vaping, as far as I can tell, quite harmless and certainly less harmful than smoking, is being banned all over Europe and the United States and Canada. I don't know about Australia. On the grounds, basically, they like it. And if they like it, we should ban it, even though there's no harm to anyone else and even diminished harm to the person who consumes it. Now, there are very bad consequences for society of denying freedom and responsibility. Let's take the case of drug overdoses. 2013, 43,982 people were listed as having died of drug overdoses in the United States, according to the Centers for Disease Control. Almost every single one of those was because it's illegal. Because you don't know what you're getting. Because there's no legal liability. Unlike going to a bar, if you walk out to a bar here, you know the difference between a beer, a cider, and a vodka tonic. You know what you're getting. But when you go buy something in an illegal black market, in an alley someplace, you don't know what you're getting. So almost all of those deaths are because of the war on drugs. Similarly, in England, many countries do not count these numbers, but I've tried to find those that do. And then another one that doesn't show up, at least among Americans, the murders. Over 100,000 people killed in Mexico alone, and more in Honduras and Guatemala because of the war on drugs. And Americans don't pay attention because they're not dying in their country. They're piling up in another country. Mexico already legalized narcotics for personal use. This is not a domestic problem in Mexico. It's 100% caused by the United States government, by their policies. And when I did some research on this, I did something I encourage you not to do, which means some of you will go and do it. I Googled, under Google Images, the following words: murder victims, narco trafficking, Mexico. Do not do this if you want to avoid nightmares. It was like Islamic State. Unbelievable. The horror, the beheadings, the massacres, the body parts spread in Mexican cities. Just horrifying. And all because of a policy in the United States of prohibiting narcotics. Now we could ask, well, maybe, some of our conservative friends say, if you make it legal, people will think it means it's okay. The government's saying it's a good thing. It's legal now, so go do it. We've endorsed it. Well, we can look at the Dutch experience in the Netherlands for decades. If you want pot, it's easy to get. Anybody can get it. Teenagers can get it. You go into a coffee shop, as they're called. Very easy. Well, what is the use of marijuana in the Netherlands? Here, where it's easily available. And here's the United States, where it is prohibited. And this is not from recent years, by the way, where 2 states have legalized it. This is over decades. And by the way, shout out, this is the Czech Republic here, I'm not sure why. Enjoyed that a great deal. And then we can look at the data between Netherlands and the United States on use of narcotics the last month, prevalence year on and year on. In fact, if you want to get drugs in the United States, there are 2 places you can score almost immediately: prison and high school. Those are the 2 places. If you want to go buy illegal drugs, you can buy them very quickly in those 2 places. Now let's turn to the welfare state, which took over our responsibility for ourselves. Well, looking at the United States welfare state, entitlement payments here, the blue line, the other are defense and net interest and so on, quite striking, and the accumulation of unfunded liabilities. And I did some research on this in Australia. You guys are not off the hook, although you're not in as bad a situation as the US or some of the Western European countries. There's a fabulous book by Jagdish Gokhale, which you can download thanks to the Institute of Economic Affairs. They offer it at 0 price. And it is very, very sobering. Pay-as-you-go systems are pyramid schemes. They're fundamentally pyramid schemes. The base of the pyramid has to get bigger or they collapse. The base is not getting bigger in most countries. And we have seen the worker to retiree ratio has been falling and falling and falling. This is a very worrying thing for the future, but politicians don't particularly care about it today. The accumulation of unfunded liabilities, if you look at the fiscal imbalance, that is defined as the amount of money that the state would have to hold today, invested, earning at least the rate of interest as they pay on government debt, in order to fund merely the difference between anticipated collected revenues and statutorily obligated expenditures. So that's in addition to all the taxes you're expected to pay. And it's simply staggering. It's unbelievable how much money it is. In the United States, Jagadish is calculating, and he thinks it's about $147 trillion net present value in order to fund it. Now, this was known from the beginning. One of Europe's great fashion models, Otto Bismarck, developed the modern welfare state. They knew it at the start, from the very beginning. Very dry comment by E.P. Hennock, who did a fabulous study of the welfare state in England and Germany. Liabilities would accumulate only gradually. It reduced costs in the early years and made the proposed levels of compensation feasible. After all, achieved at the price of piling up problems in the future. And what politician cares about the future? Not many. They care about today and getting reelected or holding on to power. But we end up paying the bills in the future for irresponsible behavior. Now, over the long run, the welfare state erodes moral capital. I'll give you evidence very quickly from the Nordic countries, from the United States, and from your own beloved homeland. Looking at disability payments to young people, so we're not talking about retirees, or over 65s, but working age people, what's been happening with permanent disability payments. This is in countries where people are living longer and living healthier. We're not talking about Zimbabwe or someplace. We're talking about Nordic countries, United States, and Australia. Well, if we look at the Nordics, remarkable graph, this happened between Norway. Wealthy, healthy Norway, big increase in young adults receiving permanent disability payments. If we look at various countries, this is the triangles here, diamond to what it was in the mid-1990s, 2007 data, and what we find is an increase in a number of particularly advanced welfare states. It's easier to go on long-term disability. In those countries, the percentage of people working despite being disabled or suffering some disability has been falling as well. Norway, again, being one of the extraordinary outliers. Now, Australia is an interesting case. There has been a decline, even into negative territory in the last couple of years. I think that's a good thing. But you will notice that the long-term trend is higher than the rate of population growth in Australia. That's a little bit sobering. Where is this coming from? Almost exclusively two categories. Not accidents on the job, not people getting sick, it's not HIV, nothing like that. It's emotional difficulties. We know people suffer from clinical depression, but more and more people are saying, well, I shouldn't have to work now. And musculoskeletal problems, i.e. back pain. And I suffer from back pain and somehow manage to continue working. But more and more people have decided this is sufficient grounds to receive permanent disability payments. The American case is even more striking. This is the percentage of the population living in households that receive means-tested entitlements. Not Social Security, not Medicare, not railroad retirement, not government pension. These are means-tested. And that's a little bit sobering to see what's happening in that regard. This, you have to say, what's wrong with this picture? Here we have the odds of dying during your working ages. And this is permanent disability. Those two are moving in dramatically opposite directions. And that suggests it's considered easier, not a problem, to just live at someone else's expense. And of course, who's paying for this? Well, as we see Medicaid and Social Security. Now let's look at deficits, which means they're borrowing and borrowing and borrowing to pay current recipients. This is not sustainable over the long term. No responsible person would do it, which is why politicians do it. Now, there's some good news. Talk a little bit about that. You can develop techniques to improve your self-control. You can learn how to make better decisions. We needn't be just wards of the state. And John Tierney's writing a chapter on exactly that topic. And there's some bad news. And the bad news is governments insist you shouldn't be able to make these decisions for yourself. Someone else should make them. Someone else will make our decisions about saving retirement. You know what the attacks on superannuation in this country, people have saved for years, and it's just a big pot of money that someone should be able to spend. You're going to have to fight very, very hard to defend your own savings, choosing medical care, ingesting what you like, and so on. Let me talk very briefly about the good news. You can improve your ability to make decisions. And here's a great book. I love this book because I'm a little paternalist with all of my younger friends. I bought 28 copies, given them to my nieces and nephews and anyone who's interested. It's a wonderful book. I really, really like this book. Very readable. Roy Baumeister from Princeton, who's a leading figure in neuroscience and empirical psychology, and John Tierney, who writes well, being a science editor of the New York Times. And what they found is they've done research into willpower, people making decisions. It turns out the Victorians were onto something. We can become better people. We can become better able to make decisions through practice. They discovered willpower is scarce. You can use it up. And so, first, read John Tierney's book on how to maximize the outcome from your supply. You can deplete your willpower. Never make important decisions when you're hungry. It's a very bad idea. You'll make bad decisions. Eat a candy bar before you make the big decision, so you replenish your glucose level. Take your battles. Some things are not worth it. Move on. Focus on the things that are important to you. Make to-do lists. Such an easy thing. Most effective people in the world have to-do lists. They go and check them off periodically. Every week you should review your to-do list. Monitor yourself. This is now, technology is so cool. We have gadgets. Gadgets that can help us live better lives. Fitbit, Jawbone. If you like these things, that little Fitbit here measures how much work I've been doing every day and how many calories I'm expending. It reminds me to take the stairs and try to be a little bit more physically active. Mint.com is a great program. It sends me little emails when I'm spending too much money. A little bit more careful with my money. It's a great program, and it costs $0, by the way. I highly recommend it. You should procrastinate wisely. Put off decisions that don't need to be made today until you're ready to make the right decision. And very importantly, if it's a matter of postponing gratification, if you really want a cookie now, promise yourself you'll have a cookie later. Because part of your brain is like a small child, and it wants a cookie. And you will satisfy it if you promise that part of your brain you'll get a cookie later tonight. It actually works. This is empirically tested social science. And reward yourself when you achieve your goals. Do something nice for yourself. Remember, part of your brain is like a small child. It's the small child that survived with you. You need to reward it and praise it occasionally. We can improve our virtue and human flourishing when we restore the functional relationship. We need to use property to internalize externalities, allow markets to make decisions, or rather allow people to make decisions in markets. I want to be very careful of that. My first language was wrong. Markets do not decide anything. People make decisions through market processes. Hold people accountable. Now we know there are some extenuating circumstances that we don't hold people fully accountable for their behavior, if they're ill or have a brain tumor and so on. But let's not make the exception be the rule, which has been the tendency in many areas over recent years. And let's replace the welfare state with institutions that help us to take care of ourselves and our neighbors and family members. And the bad news. You have to fight for this. You have to fight for your freedom and your responsibility. We have very determined foes. They question our data, which is fair. Our arguments, perfectly fair. They also question our motivations, our patriotism, and our morality. And we need to stand up to that and not be bullied by that. Be willing to stand up for our values. Every day we delay these problems, especially in the welfare state, it gets worse. It gets a little worse every day. We do not force the political system to respond. When we take responsibility, it is an act of personal liberation. It's a wonderful poem, the only poem known to have been written by William Ernest Henley, but very famous. It matters not how strait the gate, how charged with punishments the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. To be responsible is a great adventure in life. To journey forth into adulthood, take responsibility for our actions. It's about morality, as Aristotle understood. Praise and blame were the signs of moral goodness or viciousness. And they were what we should focus on. What you deserve to be blamed for or praised for. And in all cases, it was the choices that you made. So to stand up as human beings, we have to demand and fight for our freedom. That's what we normally focus on. But also, we have to demand and fight for our responsibility. That is the other side of the coin. And we have to always remind ourselves and others, we are the responsible party, the grown-up party, the party that believes there are consequences to choice. About Australian Libertarians, you really do inspire the world. I'm so happy to be here among you, happy to see the positive impact that Australian Libertarians are having, and I'm really happy to see the liberty movement flourishing in this great country. Thank you very much.